Next up, your next speaker is Phillip Wylie. Phillip Wylie, Director of Services and Training at Scythe, is an offensive security professional with more than 19 years of experience in cybersecurity. He has a diverse background in multiple disciplines, including network security, application security, and pen testing. Phillip is the concept creator and co-author of the Pen Tester Blueprint, starting a career as an ethical hacker. Phillip is a podcaster and hosts the Hacker Factory podcast and the Phillip Wylie Show. And here he is with his presentation. Where was it? Offensive security for all.
Thanks for an introduction, Phil. It feels like I'm introducing myself since we have the same name. Thanks everyone for joining. Hope I don't put you to sleep since this is right after lunchtime, but great to see everyone here. This is one of my favorite conferences in Texas, so definitely love speaking here each year and love the networking opportunities here. So the presentation of my talk is Offensive Security for All. So this presentation was the inspiration of one of my previous roles as a red team lead at a company. And one of the things I thought as a security professional, I figured they would all know the different types of security assessments, which is not always the case. Sometimes things we know we kind of expect others to know, we take for granted. But in the organization, they didn't know the difference between a vulnerability scan, a vulnerability assessment, a red team operation, vulnerability scanning. Matter of fact, one of the directors wanted a red team operation done against the SAP app, and you don't do red team engagements against applications. So they kind of mentioned my background here, and so this slide kind of just demonstrates the cover of the book, and today we're doing a book signing this afternoon, so we'll be giving away copies of the Pen Tester Blueprint. And this book came out of my lectures at Dallas College. I used to teach at Dallas College. I taught pen testing and web app pen testing there. And so this book was based on that lecture that I used to teach the class, as well as I gave at conferences. And this was one of the first conferences outside of a B-Sides conference where I gave that Pen Tester Blueprint talk. I gave that presentation here in 2019. And so I was in the Tribe of Hackers Red Team book, and they asked me if I had any ideas for books that I wanted to write, and I wanted to turn this into a book. So the agenda, we're going to discuss an introduction to offensive security, security assessment types, methodologies and standards, as well as some of the security assessment tools used. So offensive security involves assessing the security from a threat actor perspective. Because when you run like a vulnerability scanner, you're only seeing some of the surface level vulnerabilities. Sometimes they're false positives, and the only way to really thoroughly test is test the same way a threat actor would try to breach your environment, to hack into it, see what's possible once you get a foothold of that system. So this is one of the reasons we do that. And one of the things, the advantages of pen testing too, is a lot of times we have to file risk acceptance in organizations. So if this vulnerability is exploitable, then it's a higher risk. And so this kind of gives you the ammunition you need to get the remediation done. It's kind of interesting, some of my experiences in pen testing. I've worked for companies before where doing pen tests for companies as a consultant, and they would point to things in the environment because sometimes the company didn't always listen to the internal people, and they would find ways to be able to get this stuff in the report to be able to remediate things that may be in that risk acceptance or something they just couldn't get management to buy into. So there's different types of targets when you're performing an offensive security assessment. So host, computers, servers, networks, applications, cloud, hardware, transportation. This could be airplanes, any type of multi-passenger vehicles, cars. Now we have the autonomous vehicles, the self-driving cars, so we need to make sure that these cars are secure. They could be used to weaponize, injure people in the vehicle, or used to injure others. And so physical security and the people, these are sometimes the ways that the threat actors get in, through social engineering. Maybe a server room is not secure. If a threat actor is able to get hands on keyboard into a console of a system that's been logged into as a domain admin or some other higher level access, they don't have to be an elite hacker to gain access to the things they need. Sometimes they may just be a lower level access, but still that makes the job easier of the threat actor. So no matter how secure your environment is, if someone is able to bypass your physical security or get someone to click on a phishing email that contains malware, they're able to gain access to that environment. So these things need to be taken into consideration. And just to kind of talk a little bit more on the social engineering, is a lot of cases companies will do these random or ongoing phishing campaigns where they use these different programs made to do these phishing campaigns, which are really good for security awareness, but they really don't test what happens if someone clicks on malware. They test to see the clicks. And so we really need to know, because a real world threat actor typically is going to send some type of malware to your system for you to click on to help them gain access to that system. And so different assessment types. So vulnerability management, this includes your vulnerability scanning, and you have vulnerability assessments, and then penetration testing, also known as pen testing, and then red teaming and adversary emulation. So there's a difference there. A lot of times you hear red teaming generalized for all offensive security where it's not, just the same way you do with blue teaming. So vulnerability management is a cyclical practice of identifying, classifying, prioritizing, remediating, and mitigating systems and software vulnerabilities. Vulnerability management is an integral piece of security, computer security, network security, as well as application security. So you can perform your pen test, but you can't do those at the rate that you can do other things like the vulnerability scanning. So you need to make sure that you're doing your recurring vulnerability scans, and also making sure you're remediating those vulnerabilities as you find those. And so vulnerability management, kind of the steps there, you're doing asset discovery and inventory. So if you don't know what's in that environment, you can't test it. And environments have become pretty dynamic. Earlier days of IT and cybersecurity, most of these environments were pretty static. A lot of your marketing teams are using microservices to spin up different marketing campaigns. Sometimes these are not taken down. Sometimes maybe the accounting team needs some application. They go around IT using shadow IT, bringing in developers to develop these applications in their environment. It's not part of the change control process. These are things that are getting totally missed out on. So we need to make sure that we're doing an accurate inventory, getting all those hosts listed that we need to test. That way we're not missing anything. And vulnerability scanning. So this is the next piece. You're running Nexpose, Nessus, OpenVAS, other different vulnerability scanners to look for those vulnerabilities. And then one of the most important pieces of this is the vulnerability remediation, and this includes your ongoing patching process to make sure these are being remediated. And then you want to repeat the cycle, and this is something you want to do on a pretty consistent basis. I would say once a month minimum. If you can do every 2 weeks, that's even better. So you want to make sure that you're repeating this process as well as doing the remediation. So vulnerability scanning, this is a computer program like your Nessus, Nexpose, Qualys that looks for CVEs, looks for vulnerabilities on these systems that you're able to detect those and remediate those items. So vulnerability scanning automates the process. So one time there wasn't vulnerability scanners. You used what tools you had out there, like Nmap, different service and port scanners that you could find different vulnerabilities or different types of services and see if they're vulnerable. So it was a more automated process, but as environments grew, we needed a way to scale that. So this was scalable by doing vulnerability scans. And this is even a tool that pen testers use during their assessments to be able to scale their efforts. And so some of the common ones are Nessus, OpenVAS, and Nexpose. And so vulnerability assessments. So this is still not an actual pen test yet, but vulnerability assessments are important. And sometimes there's times that you would pick a vulnerability assessment over a pen test. I did a pen test one time of a hospital, and during the Wi-Fi pen test, I noticed that there were some medical devices in their OR room, in an emergency room connected to the network. And I kind of stopped and went back and talked to the CISO of the company. And what we did instead of the pen test, we did a vulnerability assessment. So you're doing scans, looking for vulnerabilities, but you're not exploiting anything. So what we did is we did a vulnerability assessment and did a security configuration review of the wireless controllers. That way we could find anything there and do a good thorough assessment without putting people's lives at risk. In some cases, if you have a development environment, you could test that development environment, but some cases, vulnerability assessments are needed over a pen test. So this is kind of similar to a pen test minus the exploitation. So you're scanning for vulnerabilities, you're using other tools to detect any kind of vulnerabilities on the system, using different manual techniques. If you can test for different password vulnerabilities, like password brute forcing, and using these different tools. But one of the things you do here that you didn't do during the vulnerability scan is you're validating these vulnerabilities. A lot of times these vulnerability scanners will find false positives, or maybe it's not a false positive, but maybe there's mitigating controls that are preventing these from being exploited, and you won't know that they're not exploitable unless you try to exploit those. So this uses a combination of vulnerability scanning and other testing techniques, and a major difference is you're not actually doing any kind of exploitation or hacking in this phase. And so we get to the pen testing piece. So this is similar to the vulnerability assessment, where we do our vulnerability scans, we look for any kind of vulnerabilities, we validate whether they're false positives or not, and then we go on to the exploitation phase. We see if we can exploit those vulnerabilities. And so one of the things we can do past the exploitation phase is what data is there, sensitive data. It could be credit card information, health information, employee information, things that we need to protect. And sometimes, especially pen testers when they're starting out, they get too fascinated and targeted on domain admin or root. And that's not always the case. You need the crown jewels. You want to make sure that no one can get access to those levels of access or elevate their privileges. But you also want to make sure you're looking for any of the sensitive data, making sure that that's detected and you're able to perform remediation to prevent anyone from getting access. Because sometimes it's just an open S3 bucket or open share in an internal environment. It doesn't really take an elite hacker to gain access. A good example I like to share is a good friend of mine performed some pen testing for Dallas Independent School District, and they were breached last year. And what happened is they've been doing the pen test year after year, 2 years in a row, and when my friend went back and retested, did the second test, a lot of these items weren't remediated. Those vulnerabilities were still there. During one of the pen tests, they were able to find a bunch of passwords through hacking password hashes or finding stored passwords. And the school district wanted these passwords. They advised against it, but said, if I give you these passwords, store them in a safe place, along with a pen test report. So a couple students find this share, they get access to the pen test report, and they basically got a guide on how to hack all the vulnerable systems in that network. So they're actually going through using that as instructions, plus using the credentials that were stored insecurely on the network. And the funny thing is these students were not texting, but printing the pages out of this pen test report, sending them each page from the pen test report. And they end up sending them an email and say, we're just a couple kids, we're not security experts, but you got a lot of vulnerabilities. If you want us to fix this, if you'll pay us, we'll help you. So this is one of the things, make sure you're storing this data safely, especially when it comes to user credentials. Storing them online along with the pen test reports, very, very dangerous. So there's different types of pen testing. So black box or blind pen test is more what you see from an attacker perspective. This is going in with little to no information on the target, trying to break into it the way a malicious hacker would try to get a foothold into that environment. And the next level is gray box. So this is some information like IP address, some scoping on that pen test. And this is typically what you see most of the time. So that way, if you don't have this, then in some cases, some of these systems get passed over, they get missed. But then you get to the type of pen test called white box, crystal box, or assumed breach. These are good testing methods. So maybe someone's not able to break in to get a foothold in your environment. Maybe the endpoint detection is good. Maybe you got strong passwords, people can't break in. But what happens is someone that is able to get these passwords is stored insecurely. Maybe they a threat actor bought credentials on the dark web and they're using them to access that environment. Sometimes disgruntled employees will sell their credentials. What about nation state implants, malicious insiders? You have to test for these. So if you're only testing from the unauthorized, unauthenticated method, there's a lot of things you can miss out on there. And so especially with web applications, this has been happening for years, but once someone come out with the idea of doing assumed breach, this is kind of a good way to take your testing to the next level and making sure it's thoroughly tested. Some people that are purists from the hacker mindset will say this is cheating, but this is only really the only good way to thoroughly test your environment, making sure you have access, and with applications use different levels of access to make sure that even if you're a user of this application, you don't need to be able to see people's credit card numbers or social security numbers. This needs to be protected. And so red teaming, this is one area that kind of gets really confused sometimes. So red teaming is actually emulating a threat actor, using TTPs to emulate a certain APT to try to attack that environment. With the pen test, you're going through, someone knows that the pen test is going on. So that way they know not to stop the pen test, let you get finished with the testing, and let you know that it's not a real attack. But with a red team operation, you're using a control group like the CISO, and very few people know, because you're also testing the defenses and response time. Are the blue teamers seeing these activities? I mean, a good example is I performed a pen test for a company once. It was kind of a mixture of a red team operation and a pen test, because once we got finished trying to gain a foothold in the environment, we were going to announce that we're performing a pen test. But it was interesting because they weren't detecting a lot of the activity. And this goes to show that you really need to work on tuning your systems to detect things, because if you have a lot of noise in your environment, things get missed. So in this pen test, we were on site. Part of it was testing physical security. So I was able to get into a conference room, got in through the break room, went in there, performed testing. We were getting down to the last 8 hours of that pen test. So we had to collect information. So at this point, we're not worrying about getting detected now. So I'm running like vulnerability scanners like Nessus, running other hacking tools. I was able to intercept password hash with Responder, do a pass the hash, gain access to an XP system, got into the XP system, was able to create a user account, and they didn't detect this until 12 hours after we were gone. So and part of the reason they kind of got tipped off at what happened 12 hours later to figure out who it was. When I created the user account, I just created the account Phil because I want an easy cleanup. They're able to find this. This is not a standard account. They use a different naming convention so they could find it easy for the cleanup. But the person I was doing the pen test for actually called his cell phone from one of the internal lines, so maybe to try to go back and do some phishing later on. And so from that, they were able to look up the company that we were testing through. But like I said, this was like 12 hours later. And part of this we were testing is we were looking at the reaction time. Were we being detected and blocked? And sometimes you can have the best systems in place, but if they're not tuned, you're not monitoring and detecting this activity, then they're pretty much useless. So red teaming is also referred to as adversary emulation. And so here's the comparison. So whenever I was at the company as a red team lead, I created this slide for people so they could see the difference between the different assessment types. This breaks it down, makes it a little bit easier. So through these, you see a lot of the similarities through like the asset discovery and inventory, through your vulnerability management. But when you get into vulnerability assessments, pen testing, and red team operations, this is more reconnaissance. So you're not only using your scanning tools, you're also using open source intelligence tools like Shodan to be able to detect some of the vulnerabilities. And so you can see the difference here between the security for the vulnerability management and the vulnerability assessment is that you're actually validating the vulnerabilities with the vulnerability assessment. And it takes a little more effort and detail. So you're like performing all the steps of a pen test without the exploitation piece. And so the pen test, you're doing your vulnerability scanning, reconnaissance, vulnerability validation, exploitation, and post-exploitation, seeing what you can get with that level of access. Can you do lateral movement? Can you do privilege escalation? But the adversary emulation, you're trying to go undetected. So the things you're using for reconnaissance, you're avoiding things like vulnerability scanners. That way you're not being detected. And you're doing exploitation and post-exploitation and really focusing on stuff like data exfiltration, seeing if you can exfil data from the environment. You create like some dummy information, fake information that looks like credit card numbers or PII to see what you can exfil out of that company. But there's two benefits. There's benefits to the red team and the pen test. So one of the things you can't just totally just do red teams all the time, because what happens there is you're finding one way in, trying to gain access, maintain access, something that would lead to a breach. But with a pen test, you're trying to find all the vulnerabilities that are exploitable and exploit all those vulnerabilities and see what you can do from there. So if you're just relying on the red team operation, then you're missing out on a lot of these vulnerabilities that you might have found during the pen test. And so some of the methodologies that are good to use, there's several of them out there, but probably one of the most recently revised is the PTES, the Penetration Testing Execution Standard. And one of the reasons it's one of my favorites too is it's created by some of the best in the industry as far as consultants. You have Dave Kennedy, John Strand, Carlos Perez, different people, Chris Nickerson from Lars. They were the ones that actually created this. These are consultants. It wasn't just someone that did research on what should be done during pen tests. These are people that have been doing pen testing for many years. Some of these same people created tools. So within this methodology, you have the main section of that is pre-engagement interactions. So this is scoping the pen test, setting the rules of engagement, intelligence gathering where you're collecting information on the targets, doing your reconnaissance, and then threat modeling. So the threat modeling piece gets to be a little more important when you're doing very complex targets. So if you're doing a network pen test, you know the typical attack vectors there that you can leverage to try to exploit to gain access. But if you're doing something like an ATM machine, that's something a little more specialized. I used to work for a bank, and we outsourced our pen testing of our ATMs, and we went through the process. And so some of the things you take in consideration is the environment. Where is that ATM located at? If it's located like downtown Houston, it's going to get a lot of visibility. There's still going to be physical risks, but the risks of an ATM machine at a gas station outside of town in the country where no one's around constantly monitoring, maybe it's not a 24-hour gas station, that leaves opportunity someone actually could steal the ATM machine if it's not firmly secured. So this is where you really need to do those type of the threat modeling activities. And so vulnerability analysis, so when you're doing your scans, all this information you bring back, you're looking to see if any of those are exploitable. And then you go, the next phase is the exploitation phase, post-exploitation, and then a reporting piece. And so the PTES standard can be found at pentest-standard.org. And they even list some of the tools to use for the different types of assessments in there. As well as they also have some interview questions to use during the pre-engagement parts of a pen test. So post-exploitation techniques, these are used in your pen test and your adversary emulations. So lateral movement is the process which attackers spread from one entry point to the rest of the network. Privilege escalation is the process of gaining elevated permissions on a system or application. And accessing data, this is just accessing data in general. This is the crown jewels, what people are trying to get their hands on. And then data exfiltration, trying to see if you can export sensitive data out of the environment. And so if you try this, make sure it's not actual data. You're not using actual credit card numbers or PII. You just set up some metadata that looks similar to those types of data. And so for web app pen testing, OWASP is a great project for the OWASP Top 10, the Web Application Security Testing Guide, as well as the OWASP Top 10 and the OWASP API Top 10. They recently come out on some stuff for large learning models as well, and they've got some good information on IoT devices out there. So they're pretty good about new technologies coming out with different projects. And not only that, they offer some different pen testing tools and assessment tools out there. OWASP Zap used to be part of that, but they moved over to another open source security project to maintain and host their application there. And so different tools that you're using port and service scanners. Nmap and Masscan are very popular tools. Nmap is probably one of the oldest maintained open source tools out there, and it's one of my favorite tools to use when I'm validating vulnerabilities. Usually there is a NSE script that you can validate some of those vulnerabilities from, because they come out with these NSE scripts, so when Log4j or something comes out, you can scan your environment to see if you're vulnerable towards those vulnerabilities. And also they've got one NSE script that's the Vuln NSE script that works like a vulnerability scanner. And so also you got your vulnerability scanners, Nessus, Nexpose, Qualys, and then you have your exploit tools. So Metasploit Framework is a free tool. Most of these exploit tools like Exploit Pack, Core Impact, and Metasploit Pro are commercial and not free. And then you have the Command and Control or C2 frameworks mainly used for red teaming, but can be used for pen testing. And Cobalt Strike is a very popular one, but there is a whole list of different C2s out there that are open source that you can find on the C2 matrix. And so network vulnerability scanners, so Tenable vulnerability scanner, they also have, if you're learning pen testing, they have a Nessus Essentials edition that will scan up to 16 IP addresses. So you can download that if you want to test your home environment, or if you have a small office and you have very limited IP addresses, that can be used. And so Nessus has their security center and some other tools. They got Nessus Cloud, so they've really expanded. And then Qualys is another popular one, as well as Rapid7, Expose. And then Greenbone OpenVAS, they have their commercial and free versions of their tool. And another scanner that's gained popularity, especially in the bug bounty community, is Nuclei. It's from Project Discovery. And they have different templates on there. It's a command line scanner that you can use. And actually, Bishop Fox has some good articles on using Nuclei, as well as some of the templates that they've got. So the templates are really good if you're performing the same types of tests over and over again. You can use those templates. And then you have your web application security scanners, or DASTs. So AppScan, and then as well as Fortify DAST, which used to be Web Inspect. And so that concludes my presentation. We can open it up to questions, and here's my contact information. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you have any questions or just want to discuss offensive security. I'm always happy to talk. And this afternoon we'll be doing a book signing, so we'll be giving away copies of my book, The Pentester Blueprint, so you can come by and grab a copy of that. Does anyone have any questions? Yes. Yeah. Yes, the question was about AI being used in pen testing and red teaming. And there's some companies that are using some of this to a degree. And if you caught Hutch's talk earlier, he had some good information on that. But one of the things that you can, it's basically used to automate tasks. So currently now, people writing scripts, people are taking that, adapting it to AI. I used to work for an external attack surface management company. And what they would do is they'd figure out how to script things, and then they would put it into AI. So currently you can take care of a lot of the easy tasks. And one of the things that Hutch shared is that you can get the results sometimes of a junior pen tester, but you're missing things. I think before it could ever replace humans, we have to get to the point where AI can discover 0 days. Because so far it's only finding what you feed into it, not finding things on its own. And one of the things I'd learned about a while back through Daniel Miessler, if you want a good resource on security content AI, Daniel Miessler has a lot of good stuff. And one of the things he had mentioned on one of his podcasts last year sometime is once general AI comes around, it's able to do this thinking without being fed information. So as we evolve, things will help. But I think what I look forward to as a pen tester and a security professional is how it's going to help us with these tools. Because at one time we didn't have vulnerability scanners, but now since we have vulnerability scanners, we're able to scale. So I look at these tools, be able to scale. I don't know how soon they'll replace people. Eventually, they probably will. But the nice thing is helping us scale, because so many companies are shorthanded. They don't have very many people on their team. They're limited to what they can do. And some of the AI tools can make it easier for some of the lower level junior people to be able to do certain tasks and be more effective. So I see it taking away some of the redundant, boring tasks. Like a pen tester, a lot of times the thing we dread is validating SSL certificate, TLS related vulnerabilities, going through and validating those. Nessus found it, but you've got to validate it. And sometimes even though Nessus found it and other vulnerability scanners, sometimes it's hard to duplicate validation. And so just to be able to remove some of that stuff out of the way, and pen testers can do more creative stuff and spend more time on actually trying to hack things, opposed to going through and running these different scanners and validating some of these other findings, and just give us more time. Yeah, at one point I didn't think it would ever replace, but the more I see things, I see it can replace some skills. But I think it's yeah, I don't see it anytime soon, but I think it eventually could. There's people trying to automate pen testing, but still there's some things out there that some people are really good. I mean, I know some pen testers that are finding 0 days on pen tests. And so now it's, currently you have to teach it to be able to find those things. It only knows CVE numbers. It's looking for that, just like a vulnerability scanner. But I think it could eventually, but I think it's really just going to help with the tools, help us do more in less time and kind of take care of some of the menial, boring tasks and help scale. It's something definitely needed because we just don't, a lot of cases, companies don't have the people they need and they're not putting the money out there. But which I'd really like to see more companies give junior pen testers a break or move people within organizations because, there's such a skills shortage, they say, but I think a lot of it's the biggest thing is not giving people a chance and opportunities. Move people up internally, try to do something about this skill shortage or people shortage opposed to just complaining about it. There's things we could do. One of the things I would like to see, and I'd recommend it to a company a while back that does pen tests as a service, is I had an idea, we need more, there's internships out there, but you have to go to college. But what if we had apprenticeships and brought people on through apprenticeships? But one of the problems I saw with that is this company, they can only support 2 people per year, so it needs to be more scalable. So if we had apprenticeships, more companies buy into that, do some training, bring someone on, because the biggest hurdle for people getting jobs is not having the experience. If you don't have the experience, it's hard to get a job. You can eventually get one, but it's very difficult. But if you had apprenticeships where you brought someone in, if they only had, typical apprenticeship lasts a semester, so like 6 months, you give someone 6 months. If they don't work out or you don't have the budget to hire them permanently, then now they've got 6 months experience. They can go somewhere else and get a job. But kind of a tangent, but a good question. Anyone else? Yes. Could you come up here and yeah, and if you don't mind, so I can hear you. Sorry.
Any advice for people looking to get into the field? I mean, because there's a big debate where people are considering wanting to go to college for the experience, but then people are saying like, no, try the certification route. But then there's even no, you have the experience to put on paper for your resume. So what would you recommend starting?
Sure. He was asking about ways to get started in pen testing, whether you need degrees or certifications. And actually, the nice thing about cybersecurity in general, especially pen testing, it doesn't really require a degree. There's really no degrees out there unless you go the SANS route. Some colleges might offer a pen test class, and that's it. But then the certification route, those get your foot in the door, and sometimes you need those to get in some kind of certification, entry-level cert to get in. But getting the experience, because if you learn it well enough, there's like cobalt.io. If you go to their website and look at the jobs, they have what they call Cobalt Core, and they will show you their path. Even them in Synac, they've got a path to coming to work for them. They're both do pen tests as a service, and so they show you the path. So you can go on like Hack the Box and complete those paths, and it will get you in line for an interview. Like Cobalt, they actually have like a application they give you to do a pen test against. You perform the pen test against that application, it gets you in for an interview and gets you in to work contract. And they start out like $1,500 per pen test. And so that's like no more than 35 hours for the pen test. And that's like having no experience. And one of the things people have to look at too, trying to get into the industry, used to we thought of artists and graphics designers having a portfolio, but now we need portfolios as security professionals. So if you wrote some script, some kind of automation, put on your GitHub. If you've done write-ups on different vulnerabilities, if you keep a blog, that type of stuff, do walkthroughs on YouTube, and have these different videos, people can see that information, because when you're competing against someone else, they see your resume and they only see the things you've done and the classes you've taken. But if you actually got links to your GitHub, and even finding CVEs, Joe Helly, the mayor, has a Medium article that was titled "One Night I Was Bored and Found 2 CVEs." And so what he was doing was installing free and open source software in his home lab, performed a pen test against it, reported, and he got CVEs. As a hiring manager, I would be more likely to hire someone with CVEs than certifications, because a CVE, that was a 0-day. It hadn't been discovered. And if you're able to find 0 days, you're able to use a vulnerability scanner and find stuff that's there. So CVE is a good route, and some good educational content. I love Try Hack Me. I think that's a good first starting place. As you get experience, Hack the Box and Hack the Box Academy is good. And TCM Academy has some really good security training there. It starts out kind of a little easier and entry level. It's not as difficult as some of the other resources, but those are some good ways. And then networking. If you network, that's the biggest tip I can give you for as far as getting jobs. An example I share was in 2017, I got tired of all the travel at consulting, and I was at an OWASP meeting. There was someone there that worked at US Bank and said they were hiring. I gave him my resume. He got it to the hiring manager. I got interviewed, got hired. The same time I applied at Bank of America, same exact job, same responsibilities, and it took me a year to hear back from them. And this is someone that's experienced. So if you're new trying to get in, you're probably going to trip less of the algorithms and keywords. So the networking coming to conferences like this, your different local meetups, network and meet people. And one of the things for the introverted people is when you come to these type of meetings, the security professionals, the techies, the nerds, you're among your people. And one of the things I've learned is I'm kind of a shy person, but once I learned that I was around my own people and I was comfortable, I was able to open up. So when you go to these meetings, talk to people. When I was teaching at the college, I always had people looking for entry-level or junior pen testers. And people I knew in the community that were recent college grads, that I knew that what they wanted to do, I was able to refer them. And that's because I talked to them, they attended the meetups, told people what they wanted to do and what they were doing. So I don't know if that helps, but yeah. And so if you go to my YouTube channel, I don't know if I got the list up there, go to my YouTube channel, I've got a whole semester's worth of my lectures for the pen test class I taught at Dallas College. And I know some people have done the Pen Test Plus and said that actually helped them in their studies. Yeah. Yeah. So you just need to do the networking, ways to get hands-on experience is doing bug bounties. CTFs is valuable. Some people downplay the OSCP, saying it's CTF-like. But when you say it's CTF-like, it's more difficult than real world because some of the systems in the OSCP exam, you're not going to find anything that complex in the real world. If you find certain vulnerabilities that you find in that, sometimes you've gained a foothold. But what that CTF does is teach you different types of hacks and helps you really develop your skills. A good example, one of the best pen testers I know and security researchers is John Hammond. He does a lot of CTFs, builds CTFs, so that's a lot of value there. So.
Do you think a SOC analyst would be able to have better opportunities of breaking into like a CTF? I'm sorry.
Yeah. So he asked if a SOC analyst would be more likely. One of the things, if you're working in any area of IT or security, it's going to be easier to break in. And there's someone from our local community that started out as a SOC analyst. He worked in the SOC while he was studying pen testing and moved in from there. The good thing about being a SOC analyst, you're able to see what malicious traffic looks like, and what you learn from pen testing will help you in that role. So being a SOC analyst, that's another. SOC analyst has a lot of good paths too. You can go into incident response and threat hunting from that. But the things you learn there, just having that experience will help you. So one of the beauties of cybersecurity is, okay, if you're a database administrator, you want to be a Cisco router person, you're going to have to learn something new. You probably got to take a pay cut and learn all that stuff. But in security, you can move to different roles, and that's like, look at it like taking a different course in college. This audit information will help you in pen testing. The SOC information will help you managing firewalls or pen testing. So all that experience kind of builds off of each other. So do what you can to get your foot in the door. But one of the things I advise is once you get your skills up where you can perform a web app pen test, sign up with Cobalt. And once you pass that, you're doing pen test. $1,500 per pen test is not a lot of money, but once you get the experience, you can go somewhere working full time, and there you've got your experience from that.
And then a final question. So I had a couple people ask me, based on this track, right? There's so many paths. Like when you think of the blue teaming side, you got like the malware reverse analysis, and you got the SOC analyst, all that stuff, and then you got the red team, which kind of dwindles down into like a lot of different fields. How does someone like? It could be overburdening, overbearing whenever you look at that whole entire scope and trying to figure out what my niche going to be. So I guess
So the question was where to start out as far as, one of the things I would advise is go to conferences, attend the different talks, try different courses like on Try Hack Me, find out what you're interested in. And the thing I would find is if you got a background in something, that's going to make it easier. So if you're a web developer, maybe you do software Q&A, that is a good experience to be a web app pen tester. So one of the things too is realize you can't know everything. Find something you like, and once you realize it, specialize. A good example is Tiberius. Tiberius started out doing network pen test and web app pen test, and then he specialized in web app, and that's where you get really good when you specialize. But what you're looking at is finding something you like. Just try the different things and see what's interesting to you. I had a coworker at U.S. Bank that he was in IT. He was taking digital forensics courses through SANS. And so he's going through all these courses, and he thought, maybe if I took a pen testing class, it would make me a better digital forensics investigator. He took the pen testing class, fell in love with it, now he's a pen tester. So getting experience, some pen testing may seem like the end-all be-all to you, but you might find something else that you like better. So I would always be curious and check out other things. And so yeah, thanks for the questions. Anyone else? I guess. Sure. So yeah, pen testing, he asked for clarification between pen testing and red teaming. So pen testing, you're looking for all the vulnerabilities that can be exploited. Red teaming, you're actually trying to emulate a threat actor. So you're doing something that would lead to a breach. And with red teaming, you're leveraging stuff like social engineering and sometimes physical pen testing, because sometimes the threat actors are not always virtual. They could be someone that's a physical threat. But they're both important, and with the red team operations, you usually get more time. These could be ongoing for months or years, whereas a pen test could be, weeks or a month. Good question. Yes. At the book signing today. If you don't get it there, you can find it on Amazon or any of the major booksellers online, but there'll be a book signing this afternoon, I believe, right after, I think it's after my presentation. Yeah, it's also on Amazon. Yep. Amazon's probably one of the less expensive places to buy it, because actually with my discount, it comes. Usually when I donate books, I usually go through Amazon and purchase them. Well, thanks everyone. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.